March 30th, 1944. 900 Lancaster and Halifax bombers climb into the night sky over England. Their target is Nuremberg, deep inside Germany. But tonight, something is different. Flying 15 minutes ahead of the main force, a small group of Mosquito aircraft carries the most dangerous job in the Royal Air Force. These are the Pathfinders. Their mission is to find the target, mark it with coloured flares, and circle overhead directing the attack, while 700 German fighters hunt them through the darkness. By dawn, 95 bombers will be burning wreckage scattered across Europe. It will be the worst night in Bomber Command history. And the men who flew first into that hell had already accepted they probably would not survive the war. This is the story of the RAF Pathfinder Force, the elite squadrons who led every major bombing raid over Nazi Germany. The men who volunteered for 45 missions when 30 was already considered a death sentence. In some squadrons, 4 out of 5 never came home. They developed revolutionary technology that changed aerial warfare forever. They were commanded by an Australian who escaped through frozen mountains after being shot down over Norway, a man who would become the youngest Air Vice Marshal in RAF history. And when the war ended, they were the only senior RAF command whose leader was denied a knighthood. For decades, their sacrifice was forgotten. The Bomber Command Memorial in London was not unveiled until 2012, 67 years after the war ended. To understand why the Pathfinders existed, you need to understand how badly the bombing campaign was failing in its early years. In August 1941, a civil servant named David Butt was asked to analyse Bomber Command's results using aerial reconnaissance photographs. What he found was absolutely devastating to those who believed in strategic bombing. Of the aircraft recorded as having attacked their targets, only 1 in 3 had dropped their bombs within 5 miles of the aiming point. 5 miles. That meant 2/3 of bomber crews were missing their targets by the width of a small city. On moonless nights over the heavily industrialised Ruhr Valley, that number dropped to 1 in 15. Prime Minister Winston Churchill read the Butt report and noted that it required urgent attention. The statistics were damning evidence that Bomber Command was failing its mission. Bombers were flying hundreds of miles into enemy territory, losing crews at horrifying rates, and hitting nothing but empty fields and farmhouses. The resources poured into the bombing campaign, the aircraft, the fuel, the highly trained young men, were being wasted on raids that accomplished nothing. Britain was losing the bombing war before it had properly begun. Something fundamental had to change, or the entire strategic bombing concept would collapse under the weight of its own failure. The root problem was navigation. In 1941, bomber crews had no radar, no satellite guidance, no precision instruments of any kind. They flew by dead reckoning, using compass, airspeed, and calculated wind drift to estimate their position. An experienced navigator might manage to find a major city on a clear night with good visibility and favourable winds, but over Germany, nothing was ever clear. Smoke screens, decoy fires, total blackout conditions, and industrial haze made visual identification nearly impossible. The Germans made it worse by building elaborate decoy sites called Scheinwerfer, complete with fake factories that would light up convincingly when bombed. Many British crews died attacking these fakes, while real targets remained untouched. The solution seemed obvious to some forward-thinking officers. Create an elite force of the best navigators and most experienced crews to find and mark targets for the main bomber stream to follow. The idea had already been proven by the enemy themselves. The Luftwaffe used specialised Pathfinder units called Kampfgruppe 100 during the Blitz, and their accuracy was devastating. British cities had burned because German Pathfinders knew how to find their targets and mark them with incendiary bombs. But when the concept was proposed to Air Marshal Arthur Harris, the commander of Bomber Command, he rejected it completely and fought against it with characteristic stubbornness. Harris believed that creating an elite unit would damage morale in regular squadrons by cherry-picking their best crews and leaving the rest feeling second-rate. He thought spreading expertise across all squadrons was better than concentrating it in one privileged group. He argued that the group commanders would resent losing their best men to a new formation. He was wrong on almost every count, but Arthur Harris was nothing if not stubborn. It took a direct order from Prime Minister Churchill himself, transmitted through the Chief of Air Staff, to force Harris to create the Pathfinder Force. Even then, Harris made his displeasure clear to everyone involved. The man chosen to lead this new force was one of the most remarkable figures of the Second World War, though he remains largely unknown today. Donald Clifford Tyndall Bennett was born on a cattle ranch in Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia, on September 14, 1910. He joined the Royal Australian Air Force to learn to fly, but budget cuts during the Great Depression meant he and his fellow trainees were asked to transfer to the Royal Air Force in Britain. Bennett agreed and never looked back. His talents were exceptional from the beginning, and his passion for precision flying bordered on obsession. In the RAF, Bennett developed an almost fanatical dedication to accurate navigation that would define his entire career. He earned qualifications as a pilot, navigator, wireless operator, and ground engineer, mastering every aspect of aviation technology. He wrote the definitive textbook on aerial navigation, The Complete Air Navigator, which remained in print for 30 years and trained a generation of aviators. Before the war, flying for Imperial Airways on commercial routes, he pioneered long-distance flight techniques and set multiple aviation records crossing the Atlantic. When he rejoined the RAF in 1941, he was arguably the most qualified aviator in the entire British Commonwealth. Bennett's first wartime command was 77 Squadron, flying twin-engine Whitley bombers on night operations over Germany. He transferred to 10 Squadron and its 4-engine Halifax heavy bombers in April 1942, taking over a unit that needed strong leadership. Within weeks of assuming command, Bennett was given one of the most dangerous missions of the entire war: attack the German battleship Tirpitz, hiding in a Norwegian fjord. The Tirpitz was a monster, 42,000 tons of armoured warship, a sister ship to the Bismarck. Its mere presence in Norway threatened every Allied convoy carrying supplies to Russia. Bennett led his squadron personally on the Tirpitz mission, flying at dangerously low level through Norwegian mountains and fjords to find the hidden battleship. The navigation was difficult, the anti-aircraft defences were heavy, and the margin for error was essentially zero. They found the ship. And then Bennett's Halifax was hit by concentrated anti-aircraft fire and went down over enemy territory. Most squadron commanders who were shot down would have died in the crash or been captured and spent the rest of the war in a prison camp. Bennett had other plans. He walked out of Norway on foot through ice and mountains, evaded German patrols, crossed into neutral Sweden, and returned to Britain within weeks. In July 1942, Harris summoned Bennett to Bomber Command headquarters at High Wycombe. Despite personally opposing the Pathfinder concept and fighting against it at every opportunity, Harris had been overruled by higher authority, and now he needed someone competent to make the idea work. He told Bennett directly that he had fought against this idea tooth and nail, that he did not believe in creating an elite corps, but since it was being forced upon him, he wanted Bennett to command it. Bennett would be the youngest group commander in the Royal Air Force by approximately 20 years. The other group commanders were career officers from wealthy British families who had risen through peacetime ranks and social connections. Bennett was an Australian colonial who spoke his mind bluntly and did not suffer fools. The Pathfinder Force was officially formed on August 15, 1942, at RAF Whiten in Cambridgeshire. Bennett was given 5 squadrons drawn from each of the existing Bomber Command groups: 7 Squadron with Stirlings, 35 Squadron with Halifaxes, 83 Squadron with Lancasters, 109 Squadron with Wellingtons and the promising new Mosquito, and 156 Squadron, also with Wellingtons. The aircraft were a mixed collection of whatever could be spared, often older models that other squadrons were glad to dispose of. The crews were volunteers, but not always the best ones, because some resentful group commanders deliberately held back their top performers. The first Pathfinder operation came just 3 days after formation, on August 18, 1942, against the German port of Flensburg on the Danish border. It was not a success. The marking was scattered across a wide area, the subsequent bombing was inaccurate, and Harris was quick to point out the failure as evidence that his opposition had been correct. But Bennett was already learning from every mistake. He understood that the Pathfinders needed 3 things to succeed: better technology for navigation and marking, better training for crews, and better aircraft capable of reaching targets quickly and surviving to mark them accurately. The technology came first in the form of Oboe, a revolutionary blind bombing system that used 2 ground stations in England to guide an aircraft to its target with unprecedented precision through any weather conditions. One station, called Cat, tracked the aircraft's distance along a curved path toward the target. The other station, called Mouse, measured the precise moment when the aircraft reached the exact bomb release point. The navigator heard a continuous tone in his headphones that warbled if he drifted off the correct track. At the precise moment over the target, Mouse transmitted the release signal. Oboe could place bombs within 100 yards of an aiming point through complete cloud cover. The limitation of Oboe was range. Because it relied on ground stations in England, the system only worked up to about 270 miles from the transmitters, roughly the limit of the Ruhr industrial region. Beyond that range, the curvature of the Earth blocked the radio signals. Additionally, only 1 aircraft could use each Oboe station at a time, limiting the number of markers that could be placed in any given minute. But for marking targets in the Ruhr, the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany, Oboe was revolutionary. It transformed what had been nearly random bombing into precision attacks that could destroy specific factories. The aircraft that made Oboe truly effective was the de Havilland Mosquito. When Bennett first requested Mosquitoes for his Pathfinder Force, the other group commanders laughed openly at the suggestion. They said it was a fragile wooden machine built from plywood and balsa wood, totally unsuitable for the rigors of operational service. They said it would be shot down immediately because it carried no gun turrets for defense against fighters. They said it was far too small to carry the bulky electronic equipment that Pathfinder operations required. Finally, they declared that official tests had proven it was completely impossible to fly the Mosquitoes safely at night. Bennett listened to these objections and then raised an eyebrow. He replied that he was very sorry to hear it was impossible to fly the Mosquito at night, as he had been doing so regularly during the past week and had found absolutely nothing wrong with the aircraft. There was a deathly silence in the room. Bennett got his Mosquitoes, and they changed everything about the precision bombing campaign. The Mosquito was designed by Geoffrey de Havilland on a simple principle: speed is the best defense. Without gun turrets and armor plate, the aircraft could reach nearly 400 miles per hour, faster than most German fighters. The first operational Oboe mission came on December 20th, 1942, against a power station in Holland. It was a test of both the technology and the tactics, and it worked almost perfectly. On New Year's Eve, 2 Mosquitoes led 8 heavy Lancasters against Dusseldorf using Oboe marking. Only one of the 2 Oboe systems functioned properly, but it was enough. The following bombers hit multiple industrial buildings by aiming at the Pathfinder markers. In February 1943, the Pathfinders used their new H-2S ground mapping radar for the first time against Wilhelmshaven. They dropped parachute flares above complete cloud cover in a technique called sky marking. The results at Wilhelmshaven demonstrated the potential of the Pathfinder concept. The main force observed an incredible explosion through the clouds, a massive blast that was visible for 10 minutes as it continued to burn. They had hit the naval ammunition depot at Marienziel, destroying 120 acres of military storage. One well-placed bomb on a depot full of naval shells had caused more destruction than hundreds of poorly aimed bombs scattered across the countryside. The Pathfinder concept was no longer an experiment forced on a reluctant bomber command. It was a proven technique that was winning the air war over Germany. In January 1943, the Pathfinder Force was upgraded to full group status as No. 8 Group Bomber Command. Bennett was promoted to Acting Air Commodore, and by December of that year, at just 33 years old, he became an Acting Air Vice Marshal, the youngest officer ever to hold that rank in the history of the Royal Air Force. His force grew from the original 5 squadrons to an eventual 19 squadrons, with thousands of highly trained aircrew. Every major Bomber Command raid from this point forward would be led by Pathfinder aircraft marking the targets. The question was no longer whether the concept worked, but how many young men it would cost. The Pathfinder crews were volunteers who knew exactly what they were accepting when they signed up for the force. A standard Bomber Command tour was 30 operations. Survive 30 missions over Germany and the occupied territories, and you would be sent to a training unit as an instructor for 6 months of relative safety before returning for a second operational tour. The mathematics of survival were already grim enough. With average loss rates around 4% per raid, a crew had roughly a 30% chance of completing 30 missions and surviving their first tour. But Pathfinder crews committed to 45 operations, not 30. And because they flew first over the most heavily defended targets, because they arrived before the defences were saturated, because they had to circle overhead marking while the entire German air defence system concentrated on destroying them, their loss rates were at least twice those of the main force crews following behind them. The mathematics of survival for a Pathfinder crew were almost absurdly bad. The odds of completing a full Pathfinder tour were calculated in single-digit percentages. Most men who joined the Pathfinders would not survive to see peace. If you want to see how this story ends for the men who flew first into Germany, hit that like button now. It really does help us share these forgotten stories of World War II with more people who should know about them. Subscribe if you have not already, because next week we are covering another hero of the air war whose story has been forgotten by history. Now back to the Pathfinders and the incredible men who volunteered despite knowing the odds were stacked impossibly against their survival. Yet men continued to volunteer for the Pathfinders in large numbers throughout the war. They volunteered because the Pathfinders offered something rare in the military: genuine recognition of professional excellence. Bennett personally addressed every intake of new crews at his headquarters. He told them exactly what was expected, what the risks really were with no sugarcoating, and what the rewards would be for those who met his standards. Pathfinders received a step up in rank and an increase in pay compared to equivalent positions in main force squadrons. They were permitted to wear a distinctive gilt metal Pathfinder badge beneath their aircrew wings. This badge became one of the most coveted symbols in the entire Royal Air Force during the Second World War. Only men who served with 8 Group Pathfinder Force were entitled to wear it. The badge could not be bought, could not be inherited, could not be claimed by anyone who had not earned it in the burning skies over Nazi Germany. Men who wore it were acknowledged by everyone in Bomber Command as the best of the best. the elite among an already elite group of combat aviators. For many young aircrew, that recognition and the respect of their peers was worth the almost mathematical certainty of death that came with earning it. The techniques the Pathfinders developed would define strategic bombing operations for the remainder of the war and influence military aviation doctrine for generations afterward. The most basic technique was ground marking, where Pathfinder aircraft dropped specially designed coloured target indicator bombs directly onto the aiming point of a raid. These TI bombs burned in distinctive colours: red, green, yellow, or combinations, depending on the specific marking plan developed for each operation. Different colours were used for initial marking, backup marking, and shifting the aim point as the attack progressed through its phases. The main force crews following behind the Pathfinders were briefed before each mission to bomb specific colours in specific sequences according to the master plan. If the initial red markers drifted from wind or were placed inaccurately, backup crews would drop green markers on the correct position and radio instructions for the main force to shift their aiming point. When ground marking was impossible due to heavy cloud cover over the target, the Pathfinders used an alternative technique called sky marking, dropping parachute flares above the clouds that drifted slowly downward as aiming points. It was less accurate than ground marking, but vastly better than the random bombing of the pre-Pathfinder era. The most dangerous Pathfinder role of all was the master bomber. This was a senior and highly experienced crew who arrived over the target first, assessed the accuracy of the initial marking, and remained overhead throughout the entire attack, directing operations by radio, while hundreds of heavy bombers pounded the city below. The master bomber would circle continuously over the target, calling out corrections to following aircraft. Bomb the red TIs. Ignore the greens which have drifted south. The yellow backup markers are now the primary aiming point. He would fly low through smoke and fire to verify what was being hit. The master bomber circled over a target being destroyed by hundreds of Lancaster and Halifax bombers, while German night fighters and anti-aircraft guns concentrated every available resource on destroying his aircraft. The Germans quickly understood that killing the master bomber would disrupt the entire attack. Every master bomber aircraft had a deputy flying alongside, who would take over command if the primary was shot down or damaged beyond function. On many raids, both the master bomber and his deputy were killed, and the attack continued without central coordination as best it could. One of the most famous master bombers was Wing Commander Guy Gibson, who had led the legendary Dam Busters raid against the Ruhr dams in May 1943. Gibson had already completed multiple operational tours and won the Victoria Cross for directing the dam attacks while flying through concentrated anti-aircraft fire. He should have been sent to a safe training posting or a staff job where his experience could benefit others without further risking his irreplaceable life. Instead, Guy Gibson kept volunteering to fly operations. He seemed unable to stop returning to combat. On September 19, 1944, Gibson volunteered to serve as master bomber for a raid on the twin German towns of Mönchengladbach and Reit. He was flying a Mosquito, borrowed from 627 Squadron, with squadron leader Jim Warwick as his navigator. Neither man had extensive experience with the Mosquito's complicated fuel system, which required the navigator to manage fuel tank switching during flight. Somewhere over Holland, on the return journey, Gibson's Mosquito ran out of fuel, or the crew accidentally cut off fuel supply by mismanaging the system. The aircraft crashed near the town of Steenbergen in the Netherlands. Both men were killed instantly. By 1943, the Pathfinders were leading massive raids against German cities almost every night when weather permitted operations. The Battle of the Ruhr ran from March to July, targeting the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany with unprecedented precision, guided by oboe marking from high-flying Mosquitoes. Essen, home of the Krupp armament works that produced much of Germany's military equipment, was attacked repeatedly. The Pathfinders marked it with oboe-guided accuracy, and the main force demolished entire factory complexes that had seemed invulnerable. Dortmund, Duisburg, Cologne, Düsseldorf, the great industrial cities of the Ruhr burned night after night under Pathfinder-guided attack. The losses came in waves that seemed almost random to the men who flew through them. Some nights, a raid would return with only a handful of aircraft missing, losses that could be absorbed and replaced within days. Other nights, disaster struck without warning. The Battle of Berlin, from November 1943 to March 1944, was Air Marshal Harris's sustained attempt to destroy the German capital and break civilian morale. Harris believed that if Berlin could be completely wrecked from the air, the war might end without need for a ground invasion. Berlin was the ultimate target, the heart of Nazi power. But Berlin was at the extreme range of British bombers, requiring long flights over heavily defended German territory in both directions. The defences around the capital were the heaviest in the world, with hundreds of searchlights, thousands of anti-aircraft guns, and swarms of night fighters, guided by sophisticated radar. The winter weather made accurate marking almost impossible, with clouds, ice, and storms disrupting operations constantly. Over 16 major raids against Berlin, Bomber Command lost more than 500 aircraft and their crews. The loss rate climbed above 5%, then kept rising. On some Berlin raids, the Pathfinders who flew in first suffered even worse casualties than the main force. March 30th, 1944, became the worst night in Bomber Command history. The target was Nuremberg, famous as the site of Nazi party rallies, and now home to a major industrial complex producing war materials. Weather forecasts predicted protective cloud cover along the route that would shield the bomber stream from German fighters. The forecasts were catastrophically wrong. The bombers flew for hundreds of miles through clear, moonlit skies that made them visible for miles in every direction. A strong wind pushed the bomber stream north of the planned track, directly over German fighter bases. German night fighters found the bomber stream almost immediately after it crossed into enemy airspace and tore into it with devastating effect. The running battle lasted for hours as the bombers pressed on toward Nuremberg. Aircraft exploded in fireballs visible across the German countryside. The Pathfinders reached Nuremberg and found the city obscured by ground haze that made accurate marking extremely difficult. Their target indicators were scattered across a wide area instead of concentrated on the planned aiming point. The main force bombed where they could see markers, missing most industrial targets. 95 bombers were lost that single night, almost 12% of the attacking force. The final year of the war saw Bomber Command reach its maximum destructive power, with the Pathfinders leading every major operation. With Allied air superiority established over Europe and German defences degraded by constant attrition, the Pathfinders led raid after raid against industrial targets, synthetic oil refineries, and transportation networks. The accuracy achieved by Oboe guidance and H-2S radar allowed precision attacks that would have been completely impossible in 1942 when the force was created. Synthetic fuel plants were systematically destroyed one by one, eventually crippling the Luftwaffe by denying it aviation fuel. The Pathfinder Force flew more than 50,000 individual sorties against some 3,440 different targets between August 1942 and the end of the war in May 1945. At least 3,727 Pathfinder aircrew were killed in operations during this period. This number does not include those killed in training accidents, those who died of wounds after returning to base, or those whose bodies were never recovered from crashed aircraft. The true total is certainly higher than official figures suggest. For approximately every 10 men who joined the Pathfinders, at least 4 would never see peace again. The Pathfinders drew men from across the entire British Commonwealth and from the occupied nations of Europe fighting for liberation. Canadians flew in significant numbers, with 405 Squadron, the only Royal Canadian Air Force unit permanently attached to 8 Group Pathfinder Force. Australians like Bennett himself, New Zealanders, South Africans and Rhodesians filled cockpits throughout the force. Polish crews, who had escaped the Nazi occupation of their homeland, flew with particular determination. Free French airmen, Norwegians, Czechs and other exiles served alongside British crews united by skill, courage and willingness to accept the mathematics of almost certain death. Among the most extraordinary Pathfinder records was that of squadron leader Ron Curtis of 109 Squadron. Curtis completed 139 operations during the war, 104 of them flying as a Pathfinder, marking targets for Bomber Command. By war's end, 109 Squadron had 100 aircrew on strength, and among them, 7 had completed more than 90 operations, while 9 had completed more than 100. Curtis survived with a Distinguished Service Order and Distinguished Flying Cross. He had beaten odds that should have killed him dozens of times over. His survival was nearly miraculous by any statistical analysis. Others were not so fortunate, despite similar skill and courage. Squadron leader Alec Cranswick of 35 Squadron flew more than 107 operations, possibly as many as 143 by some accounts. He was killed in action on July 5, 1944, shot down over Germany on what should have been a routine marking mission. Squadron leader Daniel Everett, who had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross and 2 bars for his exceptional flying, completed more than 120 operations before being killed on March 8, 1945, just 2 months before the German surrender. These men had survived impossible odds for years, only to die within sight of victory. The Pathfinder crews faced dangers beyond German fighters and anti-aircraft guns. The weather itself was a constant killer, particularly the fog that rolled in from the North Sea to blanket the flat farmland of eastern England, where bomber bases were concentrated. Aircraft returning, damaged and low on fuel after hours over Germany, sometimes found their home airfields completely obscured by fog. With nowhere to land, crews would circle desperately until their fuel ran out. On December 16, 1943, a night that became known as Black Thursday, many Lancasters crashed in fog, attempting to return to their bases. Entire crews died within sight of safety after surviving the German defences. Don Bennett remained the driving force behind the Pathfinders throughout the entire war, from formation to victory. He was not a popular commander in the traditional sense. He was personally aloof, professionally demanding, and completely intolerant of failure or excuse-making. He never drank alcohol, never smoked tobacco, and was never heard to use profanity in any situation. In the masculine drinking culture that dominated RAF Bomber Command mess halls, these personal habits marked him as an outsider. His Australian origins also worked against him with some British officers, who viewed colonials with barely concealed contempt, despite their contributions to the war effort. Harris himself wrote that Bennett could not suffer fools gladly, and by his own exacting standards, there were many fools in positions of authority throughout the Royal Air Force. But Bennett's crews respected him absolutely, despite his cold personality, because he demanded nothing from them that he would not do himself. Against explicit orders from Harris, who forbade group commanders from flying operations, Bennett flew combat missions over Germany. He flew secretly, using other crew members' names in the logbooks, disappearing into the night to experience firsthand what his men faced. His willingness to share their risks earned him a loyalty that his personality alone could never have inspired. The end of the war brought no celebration for Don Bennett. When victory in Europe was declared and the fighting finally stopped, Every senior RAF commander received a knighthood in recognition of their service, except one. Air Vice Marshal Donald Bennett was denied the honour that every one of his peers received. The official explanation for this deliberate snub has never been given, but the reasons are widely understood by historians. Bennett had made powerful enemies throughout his career by his aggressive advocacy for the Pathfinders and his blunt criticism of decisions he considered stupid. His Australian directness had irritated senior officers who expected colonial deference. The Pathfinder veterans scattered across the world after the war ended. Some remained in the peacetime Royal Air Force, transitioning from propeller bombers to jet aircraft during the early Cold War years. Others went into civil aviation, using navigation skills learned while dodging flak over Germany to fly passengers safely across peaceful skies. Many struggled quietly with what would now be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder, though that medical term did not exist in the 1940s. They had survived experiences that defied normal human comprehension. Watching friends explode in fireballs beside them, feeling their own aircraft shudder under fighter attack, landing shattered bombers on foggy airfields by instinct and desperate prayer. The technology the Pathfinders pioneered during the war transformed aerial warfare forever and continues to influence military operations today. Oboe's fundamental principle of ground-based precision guidance eventually evolved into the modern systems that can guide cruise missiles through specific building windows from hundreds of miles away. The H-2S ground mapping radar was the direct ancestor of all airborne terrain-following radar now standard in military and civilian aircraft worldwide. The concept of specialized crews marking targets for following bombers influenced American strategic doctrine and continues in modern precision strike operations wherever air power is employed. Don Bennett died on September 15, 1986. One day after his 76th birthday. He had lived long enough to see the Pathfinder Association established to commemorate his men, had served as its president for years, had watched his veterans honoured at memorial services across Britain and the former Commonwealth. He never received the knighthood that was denied him in 1945. He never stopped believing he had been treated unfairly by the British establishment that he had served so brilliantly. But in the eyes of the thousands of men who had flown for him and survived, he needed no title from the crown. He was simply the AOC, Air Officer Commanding, the man who created the Pathfinders from nothing and led them through the darkest nights. This was the Pathfinder Force of RAF Bomber Command. They flew first into the most heavily defended airspace in the world. They marked targets so others could bomb accurately instead of scattering explosives across the countryside. They circled in burning darkness, directing hundreds of aircraft, while every German gun and fighter concentrated on killing them. 4 out of 5 never came home from the war. They were the best navigators, the best pilots, the most experienced crews that Bomber Command could find anywhere in the Commonwealth. And they spent themselves completely in a cause their country later found uncomfortable to remember. For almost 7 decades, no official memorial acknowledged what they sacrificed. Now you know their story.